two documentaries, the same exact murder victim in both stories, and yet two completely different stories. Why is there two different versions of the same exact story in two different documentaries? Let's be perfectly clear. Amber Costello was only murdered once, but she has multiple versions of what happened to her, and those who associate with her, her family and her friends, there's different stories about what they did. One story paints the people involved in the story as heroes. This is what I call hero worship that sometimes the media does. Victims become saints. Everything they did was they were innocent, they were perfect, and their friends are innocent and perfect, and it's kind of a hero worship complex. And then the other side of the case is victim shaming, where people will basically make the victim look like they were not so innocent, and not really saying that they had it coming, but certainly making it sound like they were culpable in some way in their own death. Now, in the case of the Gilgo Beach murders, the case that I'm now starting to follow, I've been watching a couple of documentaries to bone myself up on the story because it's the one that I think fits in the wheelhouse of the Devil's Advocates absolutely perfectly. And as I was watching the two different documentaries that recently aired, one called Gone Girls on Netflix, and the other one called the Gilgo Beach Killer, House of Secrets, and that's on Peacock. Both of those documentaries covered the story of Amber Costello, one of the victims of the 7 that Rex Heuermann is alleged to have killed. Now, there was originally 4 individuals known as the Gilgo 4, much like the Idaho 4, which is another case that I follow on the Devil's Advocates, but let's digress on that and come back to the main story. Amber Costello in the Gone Girls episode was depicted in this way, and I'm going to then contrast it to the way it was shown in the Peacock episode. So Amber Costello allegedly had a roommate and or friend who left for the evening, and Amber Costello had used Craigslist to set up a client to come to her house, essentially, and to conduct some kind of bit of business. I'll be vague about it because I don't want to say words that we don't have to say, and I'm certainly not going to use dumb acronyms. So the point being is that Amber Costello was a worker who provided her services on Craigslist. So an individual comes to her house. We will call him a John. It's an old terminology, but let's say the John comes to the house, and Amber Costello basically becomes terrified by this individual, and she texts or calls her roommate from the bathroom, having locked herself in. The story that the Netflix special highlighted was that she was terrified of the fact that she only wanted to dance for this individual, and that he expected more, and that he was demanding that she provide the services that he paid for, and she was terrified he wouldn't go away, and she doesn't want to do those things that she never intended to. That's kind of how it was painted in the Netflix special called Gone Girls. And so in comes her roommate, turning back around from where he was going for the evening to rescue his friend. He brings another friend with him and a dog. There's a confrontation that ensues. As a hulking individual, 6'6", built like a linebacker, giant man, is staring through the men who have come to protect their best friend, and he's staring through them as if they don't even exist, looking at his victim because he doesn't intend to go. Finally, they scare him off, and he gets in a truck and he drives away. It's a great story and a moment that I felt very proud of, saying, wow, don't we all need friends like this who will stand up for us and face off a monstrously large man who isn't intimidated, apparently, even by multiple men and a dog coming and facing off, and yet they had the bravery and the tenacity to stand their ground and make him go away. It was a great story, and I praised the story on the first time I started talking about the Gilgo Beach murders. But now comes Amber Costello's second version of the same exact story on Peacock, and now all of a sudden here's the story in that episode. In the Peacock's version, Amber Costello had a friend who may also have been her pimp or whatever, and they have a ruse. They have a plan that they do this to people on a regular basis. They lure people in, they take their money, and then she will call or have him show up as the angry, jealous boyfriend, demanding what the hell's going on here, sending the John away in a panic and leaving his money behind, and therefore stealing his money. It's a ruse. It's a con that the two individuals perform. So now you have to ask yourself, why is it on two different documentaries, the same exact individual, Amber Costello, in one, she's a hero and her friends are a hero. She's an innocent person who was killed by a killer because that night, while she did, by the way, cutting to the chase, case, by the way. The killer did leave, but then the killer came back and basically said, hey, that wasn't nice. Am I going to get what I paid for, kind of thing? And she ends up disappearing, never to be seen again. And her body is found on Gilgo Beach eventually and tied to Rex Heuermann, who both documentaries will say is the hulking 6'6" something man in that doorway that night, that was Rex Heuermann. And whether or not it is Rex Heuermann or not, that's something we're going to dive into on the Devil's Advocates. Even if it likely is Rex Heuermann, I have lots of questions about the Gilgo murders, especially the 11 different people that they say may be related to Rex Heuermann, and whether all of them are his. The story is absolutely crazy. Part of this is going to be a plug for you to watch. If you're my channel, watch my channel if you want to hear really, really interesting takes on what's going on in the Gilgo murders. That trial is coming up of Rex Heuermann probably sometime next year, is what I'm going to guess. And you're going to not want to miss it. If you've been following my other cases, Luigi Mangione or the Brian Koberger situation in Idaho 4, you'll know that I deep dive into the legal documents, the court proceedings, and we get into a lot of the things that are behind the story that are crazy in those stories. And Gilgo Beach is going to be nothing short of that. This is potentially one of the biggest serial killers that have ever been out there, if the things they say about him are true. But then there's all the other things about this story: police corruption, police officers who went to jail, police that tried to hamper the investigation and keep the killer from being caught. Why would they ever do that? We're going to dive into that and explain it. So I'm going to end on the last thought again about the hero worship versus victim shaming. But let's give a little bit more of a summary of why you should watch these two episodes. Again, both of these documentaries, The Gone Girls on Netflix and the Peacock special about the House of Secrets, are worth watching as a primer to this this whole show, if you will, that's going to be playing out into the courts and the national TV. It's going to be a major deal, so you don't want to miss it. And so I think you should watch both of these as a primer. But let's end on that whole thought about the whole victim shaming versus hero worship. Oftentimes, a documentary will depict the victims as being innocent people who didn't deserve what happened. And true, nobody deserves to be murdered. I get it. Nobody deserves to be murdered, and certainly nobody needs to be murdered by a serial killer and dumped somewhere like trash on Gilgo Beach. But the version of the story that paints the friends as complete heroes, have done nothing wrong, versus the one that says they were pulling a con and ripping off Johns, those are completely different stories. The world is not black and white, but oftentimes media likes to spin things in a black and white way. They want us to basically feel a certain way about the victims and feel a certain way about the alleged killer, and they will do everything they can to sway public opinion. I do everything I can to try to bring us into a neutral ground, to realize that the world is not black and white, that it's all kinds of effed up shades of gray. 50 Shades of Gray, maybe even more shades of gray than 50 Shades of Gray, but I digress. The point being is that the things aren't black and white. There's a lot of nuances I will dive into, and I recommend, if you only have time for one episode, watch episode 2 of Gone Girls on Netflix. It is totally worth it. It talks about police corruption, district attorney corruptions, the prosecutor who moved up the ranks, a corrupt cop who was promoted, the attempts to hide the investigation, and possible allegations that the chief of police himself was using prostitutes and doing drugs with prostitutes and viewed prostitutes when they were being murdered as who gives a shit, they're just prostitutes. That's the attitude of Suffolk County. That was the attitude of the police department. That was the attitude of the DA. That kind of shit should bother you. It bothers me at the Devil's Advocates, who believes in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and I'm critical of mainstream media, law enforcement, and our judicial system. So please consider watching the Gilgo Beach murders. Follow the playlist on my channel if you're not doing so already. Follow that playlist if you're interested. If you're interested in my other cases, follow Luigi Mangione. That has its own playlist. Follow Brian Koberger, Idaho 4. That has its own playlist. And whatever you do, check out the next live when I'll keep talking to you about the latest developments in all 3 of my cases. And make sure you bone up on this, and don't let anybody tell you that us YouTubers out there are victim shaming when we start asking questions about, hey, why is the story not the same on whether or not her friends are heroes or whether they're con artists? Those are legitimate questions. Whether the police officers are corrupt, whether the DA is corrupt, all of those are legitimate questions. And if they are corrupt, how can we trust what they tell us when they tell us, oh, look, we've got his DNA at the scene? If everybody's corrupt top to bottom, who do you believe? So check us out. Watch this story. It's going to be a good one.